chapter 1, and we identified that Paul's thesis statement is he's not ashamed of the gospel in verse 16, but his thesis statement for the whole book is verse 17, the just shall live by faith, the righteous shall live by faith. Chapter 2 is about God's righteous judgments, though. God's righteous judgment through not anyone's eyes, but God's eyes. You see, Paul is addressing the church in Rome, but he's addressing the church in Rome through God's point of view. And so when I opened up this morning with my statement, I did a lot of judging. I took a lot of advice, and sometimes it's hard to take advice, but when you're trying to do good for others, you tend to listen to people you're close to. I'm close to Kelly, and he always says, go back and watch your video. So I did. And then I took some advice from a younger brother named Alex, who y'all know very well, and he always says, BJ, laugh at yourself. It's okay. You'll learn things you never knew before if you laugh at yourself. So upon looking at my class that we did yesterday, I noticed I did a couple of things. I rushed. We finished the class within 25 minutes. This is an hour class. I also was talking with my hands, and this is the part where I laughed. I was doing some cross-reference points, and every time I said a reference point, I went like this. But I did it like I was conducting a choir or a band, and I was like, I see my mouth moving, but I don't hear any music. And so I also watched my posture, and I want to go through things slower, and I want to talk about the point Paul's trying to make to the church in Rome. And I don't want to conduct a choir right now. It's not what I'm here to do. But also, if y'all have questions or if y'all have a point of view, say it. Everyone's point of view is super important. We all see with different eyes. We all see at different angles. And it's important to get everyone's point of view because we can all learn from each other. But right off the bat, when I think of God's righteous judgment, I think of 1 Samuel. And I think of when the children of Israel were demanding a king. And Samuel says, y'all don't know what you're asking for. If you get this king, your children will be sold off into wars, and the king will take profits from your land and from your homes and take your daughters. And Samuel cries out to the Lord, Lord, I don't know what else to do. But God, knowing Samuel's heart and knowing the hearts of the children of Israel, says, it's okay, Samuel, they have not rejected you, but they've rejected me as their king. But we see that Samuel's heart is righteous, and his heart is faithful to the Lord, and he just wants to please the Lord. But he does that with his heart. Samuel doesn't do that with actions, with gallantry, with words of eloquence. He's faithful to the Lord with his heart. And we're going to see that Paul, he quotes Jesus quite a bit in the first few verses in Romans chapter 2. I also learned last week in the evening service, BC went into more detail with his lesson that he was going to go into detail in the morning. But as you can see, our clock this morning is fixed at the right hour, and that threw him off and me as well last Sunday when the clock was turned back, and I guess it wasn't at the right time. But BC said something in Corinthians where Paul goes, I'm coming to you in a simple way. I'm not coming to you with words of eloquence. I'm just speaking plainly to you. And so I also want to come plainly to you as we go verse for verse and study chapter 2 in Romans. So right off the bat, let's go into verse 1. Verse 1, Romans chapter 2. And I have switched over to an ESV Bible because I know that primarily a lot of people read from the ESV, and I want us to have the same words. But if you have the New King James, you will easily pick up with the ESV. Verse 1. Therefore, you have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges. For in passing judgment on one another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, practice the very same things. We know that the judgment of God rightly falls on those who practice such things. Do you suppose, O man, you who judge those who practice such things and yet do them yourself, that you will escape the judgment of God? Or do you presume on the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience, not knowing that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance. Paul is basically saying the same thing in Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. And Jesus says, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take that speck out of your eye,' when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." It's amazing how we sometimes may not realize we pass judgment on one another just by simply saying, "I think this is better," instead of "I know this is better." It can cause division, it can cause strife, but what Paul says is you condemn yourselves by judging others. Sometimes we don't realize we're condemning ourselves. I like to think back of when I was younger with my siblings, and my brother and I used to play video games, and we would say, "You don't know what you're doing. The way I do it is a whole lot better. You need to do how I do it." My brother says, "No, BJ, I'm winning more games than you are. My way is better." And of course, that's in kids' terms, but even when we come here and it can be simple things like, "You shouldn't be dressing like that. You ought to know better how to dress. Your colors aren't matching. You should dress like this. I look better. You shouldn't come that way." I'm reminded of a story one time that I learned in school where a man in a suit and tie came up to a visitor at church. And this visitor was wearing a cowboy hat, a nice buckled boots. He was dressed like a cowboy. But the man in the suit and tie said, Don't come to service like this is your backyard or going to a cowboy party." And very bluntly, the cowboy says, "Son, my cowboy hat and my belt buckle cost more than your whole entire suit." And it probably did. But you see, the man in the suit and tie was judging. We don't know what is others' best. We don't know people's intentions, where they're coming from, their own culture, and what their idea of presenting their best to God is. You see, the man in the suit and tie started judging based on what he felt was right, rather than what is right to God. But you see, Paul is not talking about the things we're talking about right now. In context, he's talking about the Jews who were judging the Gentiles, saying, "Y'all don't even keep the law of Moses, and y'all don't even understand that y'all need to keep up with our traditions." But Paul says, "Oh, how dare you tell the Gentiles to keep up with the Jewish traditions? Y'all can't even keep up with the traditions yourself. Don't pass judgment on one another." That is Paul's context here. And for the Jews, that cuts to the heart, because for a long time, we all know here as a congregation that, if you were a Jew, you were God's people. Things have changed now. But Paul is very blunt about that. And let us continue in verses 5. "But because of your hard and impenitent heart, you are storing up wrath for yourself on the day of wrath, when God's righteous judgment will be revealed." We'll go through verse 10. "He will render," he being God, "he will render to each one according to his works. To those who by patience and well-doing seek for glory and honor and immorality, he will give eternal life. But for those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, there will be wrath and fury. There will be tribulation and distress for every human being who does evil, the Jew first and also the Greek." Right here in verse 9, he's saying, doesn't matter if you're a Jew, doesn't matter if you're a Gentile, you're going to be judged equally according to God's righteous judgment. In verse 10, "But glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, the Jew first and also the Greek." Verse 11, "For God shows no partiality." In James chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, Alistair went over this a few weeks ago. "So speak and so act as those who are to be judged under the law of liberty. For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. James in that book and in that chapter saying, God showing no partiality. If you do not show mercy, God will not show you mercy. But if you show mercy, God will show you mercy.
Can you say the scripture again?
The reference?
Yeah, you should say once and it's
Absolutely.
right on my head.
James chapter 2, verses 12 and 13.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for speaking up. God shows no partiality. And in this context, Paul's preaching to the church in Rome, and he's saying, do not identify yourself as a Jew or Gentile and cling to those titles. God shows no partiality. Verses 12, very, very famous verse. For all have sinned without the law, who also perish without the law, and all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. Verse 13. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. This is exactly from James chapter 1, verses 22. James chapter 1, verses 22, which quotes, do not be only hearers of the word, but be doers of the word. I think of one time when I worked at Nat Medical Center. There was a nurse that was young and smart and was the highest in his class, and he was telling everyone what to do. And I saw a doctor come and say, son, you've only been here 1 month. Calm down, take a seat. Let the nurses show you what to do. Right now, you don't know what to do. Sit down. You see, the doctor also explained to me later, because I kind of looked at the doctor like, that was mean. But of course, I was 19 at the time, didn't know what I was talking about. I was just following orders. He said, we're not supposed to tell others what to do when we haven't done the things ourselves. And he said, you see, if I were to come here and say, I'm the doctor, you need to do the things I say, but I've only been practicing medicine for about a week or two, well, how hypocritical of me. I don't even know what to do. Don't tell someone to do something when you haven't done it yourself. And so when Paul is talking to the church, he's saying to the Jews, don't tell others to keep your traditions if you're not keeping them yourselves. And why do we keep repeating, don't keep up with the traditions? Well, we learned that in the Old Testament, Israel fell short, Israel fell short, Israel fell short. They made idols for themselves. They made idols. They worshipped other gods. They could never keep the Sabbath. They never kept the law of Moses. And so how dare they judge the Gentiles based on their past history? Their past history is not perfect at all. Verses 14. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. Verse 16. On that day when, according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of men by Jesus Christ. Verse 17. But if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God, and know his will and approve what is excellent, because you are instructed from the law, verse 19, and if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then who teach others, do not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, you steal yourself? Verse 22. You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law dishonor God by breaking the law? For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. In Jeremiah 17, verses 9 through 10, Jeremiah verses 17, 9 through 10, as it reads, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruits of their deeds. According to the fruits of their deeds. We have just seen Paul call out Jewish Christians saying, how dare you say don't put idols up, and yet you put idols up. How dare you say don't commit adultery, yet you commit adultery. Don't be hypocrites. Don't preach and then do the things that you're not supposed to do. It's like that famous quote that we tell people, especially when you're going through Bible school or amongst preachers and brethren. You better practice what you preach. I'm reminded of being a younger in my early 20s, how prideful a young mind can get. You start to take philosophy classes. I take pre-AP algebra. Of course, that's now not considered high anymore. During my time, it was considered high. But now people are taking calculus and all kinds of stuff. For further information, see Alistair and Sebastian for that. But young people can get very prideful. And sometimes young people want to go tell people what we've learned just because we've learned it. But we don't practice the things which we've learned. That can be wrong in so many ways. You see, go ahead.
Other people are actually worse at that because they think that they have all the experience. And that, causes you to, I guess, be more judgmental than when you're young. But you have to, because we think we're older, that we know everything.
Absolutely. I have a dear sister. Her name is Kayla Jenkins, and she is my best friend, but she's also one of my greatest teachers. See, I went into Austin Southwest School of Bible Studies and thought I knew things, and realized I didn't know anything. And then I came upon this young 19-year-old who, she was 20. She's 21. She's 21 now. She'll be 22 in a month. This 20-year-old was telling me how to quote scripture and do a 3-point sermon and how to do correct grammar, because let's just face it, us Hispanics have Tex-Mex language, especially from the border, and our grammar is not correct. And I spoke fast, and she would correct me, and I would get mad and say, how dare this young woman correct me? She is 20 years old. I am 20. I was 28 at the time. But you see, I was looking at it in a prideful way. And she goes, I'm just trying to help you. You see, I was studying literature, so I know my things. Please let me help you. And for the first couple of weeks, I was like, no, I know better. I'm older. My pride was louder than my obedience. And then when I started to get a failing grade, I looked at my paper. I looked at her. On the test, I failed my test. I looked at my test. I looked at hers. I saw a 50 on my paper. I saw 100 on her paper. And slowly I started to think, this girl knows what she's talking about. And little did I realize she was the smartest girl in school and she wanted to help me. But you see, I waited late. I waited late for her to help. But I also gained a friend. And she was patient with me. And she just wanted to do the right thing. You see, I wasn't there to do the right thing. I was there to try to say, hey, look at me. And it's all fun and games when we're talking about this. But when I look back, I think, well, if I listened, I probably would have still been in there. If I listened, I wouldn't have struggled as much. And you see, we need to always practice what we preach. But Paul here is talking about, if you're going to be the way, which is what the church is called in this time, and if you're going to say do this and do that according to God, you better be doing it yourself, because God knows everyone's heart. Galatians 5 verse 6. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love. Galatians 5 verse 6. And in Psalm verses Psalm chapter 62, verse 12. Psalm chapter 62, verse 12. And that to you, O Lord, belongs steadfast love, for you will render to a man according to his works. You see, Paul's talking about bearing fruit, as we learned in Jeremiah 17 about bearing fruit. You see, when we don't practice what we preach, we're not bearing fruit. We're bearing thorns. You see, when we don't practice what we preach, we lead others astray. But when we practice what we preach, it pleases the Lord. It also helps other people around us. When I think of righteous judgment, Karen, don't get mad at me after this, but Karen is very sweet. The first time I ever saw Karen get mad is when she invited me over for dinner one day, and I did not finish my plate. And she got mad. And she picked up my plate, and she turned and said, "Wimp." And I looked at Alex, and Alex goes, "She's funny, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah, she's funny." But you see, Karen just wanted me to have all of my food. She wanted me to finish my meal. She was being kind. She was being herself. And she cooks good. Let us continue in verse 25 through 28. And we'll get into a deeper discussion as we continue. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law. Verse 25. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will be condemned. You have the written code and circumcision, but you break the law. For no one is a Jew who is merely outwardly, nor is circumcision an outward and physical appearance. But a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. I'm going to go ahead and just get my notes real quick.
Why does he focus so much on the law, which I'm assuming is Old Testament?
Why does he focus on the law a lot?
Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. That's a great question. Because what we're going through right now in our young adults class with Van is we're talking about the Sermon on the Mount, but we're talking about matters of the heart. You see, Jesus focused on people's hearts. You see, he couldn't come back and say, keep this commandment, keep that commandment, because they weren't keeping the commandment. You see, the whole time the children of Israel were trying to keep the 10 Commandments with the tabernacle. You see, they were always there physically, but their hearts were so far from God. Jesus comes and says, "My Lord wants your heart." That's what's most important. And what I like to try to think in deep thought is, Jesus came to fulfill the law, right? He didn't come to break the law or overthrow it. He came to fulfill the law. You see, what I've been trying to think about in my mind is every commandment of the law of Moses, every 10 commandment, on the Sermon on the Mount, he combines all of them into matters of the heart.
Except the Sabbath.
Except the Sabbath. Why is that?
I don't know.
Because
Honestly, but I've tried, I have some dear friends that are Seventh-day Adventists, and in discussions, I've noted, that everything in the 10 Commandments Jesus taught, except to keep the Sabbath.
the Sabbath was primarily for the Passover. And so after Jesus died a perfect death and became that perfect sacrifice for everyone's sin, the Sabbath day and the Passover is abolished. He paid the ultimate price for that.
There's scripture. It says the law was nailed to the cross.
Absolutely. The law was nailed to the cross. You're taking notes, write that down. That's super important. Thank you, Sister Belva. I forgot where I was at. Give me a few seconds to recalibrate my mind.
27.
We finished the chapter. Let's go ahead and reread verse 29 of chapter 2. But a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but God. Paul says that true circumcision is a matter of the heart. It's not merely a physical outward appearance to identify that you're a Jew or not. God shows no partiality anymore. He contrasts outward observance with inward transformation, affirming that true circumcision is from the Spirit, not the letter. And that's important to know. Because no matter what we show outwardly here on this earth, God knows your heart. Go ahead and cross-reference Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 14. This is probably, in my opinion, Kelly's favorite verse. He talks about this with me all the time. Ecclesiastes 12, verse 14. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Doesn't matter what you show outwardly. God's going to know your heart on the day of judgment. Every secret thing, everything that you remember and everything that you don't know, God remembers. Matthew chapter 16, verse 27. For the Son of Man is going to come. Matthew chapter 16, verse 27. For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. And in Romans chapter 14, verses 10 through 12, Paul nails it very good later on in this chapter. Romans chapter 14, verses 10 through 12. Why do you pass judgment on your brother? Or you, why do you despise your brother? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, As I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So then each of us will give an account of himself to God. Romans chapter 14, verses 10 through 12.
It goes back to God remembers everything. Our thoughts, our heart, all of it. But when we obey the gospel and we're baptized, doesn't all that go away?
It does, but
we're not supposed to remember it or focus on it. So would the blood of Christ wipe all that out? Does God still?
you're absolutely correct. But what Paul is emphasizing is he's preaching to the people who are not practicing what they're preaching. He's saying, remember that. Remember this. That's what Paul is addressing. But for those who are not, those who are living by faith, those who are righteous, those who are just, they know that.
Why does he focus so much on the Jewish behavior and the laws when he's writing this to the church in Rome? And I don't think that they are Jewish.
1 second, Siri, okay? I'll get to you real quick. During this time, we have to also remember Paul is the first Gentile apostle. And everyone doesn't know that, so it's for Gentiles too. And Paul's making it very known it is for Gentiles. In fact, we know that back in chapter 1, Paul says, I was commissioned by Jesus himself when he was on the road to Damascus to spread out the gospel. But you see, during this time and age in the world, in Rome, it was the God of the Jews. God was known as the God of the Jews, the God of Israel. But after Jesus' death, things are changing now. Now there's debate and discussion. Who's actually a Christian? Who's actually a part of that? You see, Paul comes to educate everyone. And that's why he sends letters to all the churches throughout the area. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Siri. Yes, correct. When he says in the last verse, is a matter of the heart, I like to kind of think of, I was trying to find a good way to explain things, is like, beauty is fleeing, Proverbs 31, but a woman who fears God is to be praised. We always have to remember it's more important what goes in ourselves. What do we put in? One thing I like to talk about is Kayla always says, you always know who's a good Christian, who's faithful, because when you talk to a good Christian, they want to just speak Bible, because they're filling themselves up with Bible. But to put it in layman's terms and more fun terms, I think of like a Honda or Toyota. Now, it doesn't matter how old that Toyota or Honda gets, it's going to turn on. They have more value because of how they're made, what's inside their engine, and they're more valuable. Now, I can go and purchase a pretty, I used to fancy a Hyundai Veloster, and they have 3 doors, it's a coupe, they look kind of fast, but have a lot of recalls, or nice Ford Mustangs. They're loud, they're fast, but after 2-3 years, they get old, they're not the fastest anymore. You have to take them to the mechanic a lot. But if you keep a nice Toyota or Honda, that thing's not gonna die. I have an uncle who has a 1996 Honda Accord, and he's an HEB manager. He doesn't have to drive it, but he goes, well, it's working. And I remember during the time of the pandemic, a lot of my friends and family members, their cars were dying. They couldn't afford their payment, and my uncle goes, well, I'm fine. It may not be the prettiest, but I'm fine. I'm still going. It matters what you put inside. It will also come and to think about, like, in your daily lives, you know who's being real and who's being fake. You know who's putting on a show, and you know who actually has good intentions. See, I have this friend who he's tall, big, dark, and scary, and he likes to wear black shorts. He likes to wear black shirts with skulls on it. And he's one of the nicest guys. He's my best friend. I met him at the La Feria Academy. His name's Robert. And he's actually blind. He's legally blind. He can't drive. He can't get a job because he's legally blind. And so he has the humblest heart. And I learned how his heart was because one time, junior year, he lent me his iPod Touch. And I went on a field trip. And I lost it. Now, I went up to him and said, hey, man, I don't know how I'm going to pay you back, but I'm not going to lie to you. I lost the iPod Touch. And he told me one of the best things I've ever heard come out of any young man at that age, because I wouldn't even have said what he said. He said, BJ, your friendship is more valuable to me. It's okay. And that broke my heart in a good way. You see, people judge Robert because he wears black, and they don't know who he is. But when I come to find that he has a heart of gold, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And you see, Paul is saying it's more about what's in your heart. It's not about your fancy apparel. It's not about what you proclaim in the streets, what you proclaim to others, the image that you sell others. Because we live in an age where image is everything. And if you don't have social media, you can see it in the younger people. I have to have the perfect profile picture. Oh, this is a no profile picture. I need to update this. Or even us young men, man, those new cars look nice. They're fast. They have a good appeal. Man, Tesla, all electric. And Sebastian and I talk about that all the time. But are those things important? Well, we know they're not important. But you see, sin and looks are slippery. And they can really get us. Because at the root of it, I have a really good car. It was a gift. It was gifted to me by the Church of Christ in Raymondville during the pandemic. I don't have a car payment. I need to wake up and realize I'm blessed that I don't have a car payment. And that car runs. And it runs. Spin all the way to Tennessee and back. And you see, Paul is saying the exact same thing, but he's talking about it in a spiritual sense. And he's differentiating from the law, the old law, and the law of Christ. And you see, during this time, Sister Belva, the law of Christ is brand new. The law of Christ is something that no one has ever experienced before. So people are asking questions. But you see, why does he emphasize this in Rome? Rome is a place where there's smart people. It's the center of the world. There's Greek gods, there's Pharisees, there's Sadducees, and everyone is questioning what's going on. You see, it started off as, hey, there's a man who came back from the dead. And people were amazed, and they wanted to know about the man who was raised from the dead. But now he's established churches, and now there's a bunch of followers, and it's spreading like wildfire, spreading so much like wildfire, not even Rome can contain it. And in this time and age, you did not mess with Rome. It was either Rome or death by the sword. You see, Jesus didn't come to establish an earthly kingdom. He came to establish a heavenly kingdom, and a kingdom that has not been taken out and will never be taken out. Which is why at the beginning of class I quoted 1 Samuel, because during that time, they were asking and demanding a physical king, and they did not know what they were asking for. And that's why God says, Samuel, don't worry, they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me as their God and their king. God knows the minds of people's hearts. And you see, that's why he sent his one and only Son to show us the way, to bridge the gap between man and God, to bridge the gap between our physical understanding and his spiritual heavenly understanding. You see, that's what Jesus does for us. He combines both of them. You see, and Paul gets that very well. And when I say Paul and I chuckle sometimes, well, you see, Paul thought he had it right. And Paul had things set up. I mean, he was 007 to kill Christians. But Jesus came and said, hey man, you have it all wrong. And he didn't just say you got it all wrong. I'm going to blind you for 3 days, by the way. There's going to be a man named Ananias who's going to come baptize you, and you're going to suffer for my name's sake. And you're going to go to Rome. You may not think it. You're going to be suffering, be put in prison. You're going to be stoned, almost killed, but you're going to make it to Rome. And we learn at the end of Acts that Paul ministered to everyone in his home until his death. Paul was awesome, and Paul says amazing things. And Paul is a good educator, but Paul has a good heart. And Paul,
something that Luke was always with him, because after he was stoned,
Luke would always heal him.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was a physician,
yeah.
and a very beloved physician. You see, Paul also knows the old law. So when I kind of think about it behind the scenes, Jesus is like, this guy knows the old law. I need to use this guy so that he can teach what I'm teaching now. Because we just quoted Jeremiah chapter 17. We quoted Psalm chapter 62. We quoted Ecclesiastes chapter 12. And Paul's talking about all those things in the old law so that Jews and Gentiles can understand together. See, that's a very important word, together, because God shows no partiality. So when we leave, let us try to meditate on things of inward appearance rather than outward appearance. Let us also practice what we preach, and let us also do it in love. Because Paul's not coming here and saying, you're condemned, you're condemned. He's correcting others so that they can be right with God. Because Paul knows, I'm a chief sinner. There's nothing special about me. But let's figure this out together. God shows no partiality. That is our class for today. We have a few more minutes until we break out. Does anybody have any questions or would like to say anything or a different point of view? No. Awesome. I look forward to seeing y'all next Sunday for Romans chapter 3 and 4. We're going to combine those two chapters together. Class dismissed.